Time for our last question. Brian, as we think about, we already mentioned the book of Judges. It's one of the most wild west, if you will, of the books in the Bible. A lot of crazy things going on, but especially for our listeners who have read through the book and come to the end, the last three chapters, chapters 19 through 21, are really kind of disorienting. It's kind of like you look at it and you think, how can this be in the Bible? Should I even let my kids read this story, kind of thing? So, Brian,
troubling passages. Yeah,
it's a troubling passage. What is going on at the end of the book of Judges in Judges 19 through 21?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and there are difficult passages of Scripture, and I don't think we do ourselves any favors by avoiding them, right? And so this is a good passage. So listeners, if you've never really gone through the book of Judges before, you are probably still familiar with the bulk of the book, right? Which takes up the story of the judges. We're not creative in naming things, right? These are the stories of the mostly, but not entirely, men that God calls to redeem and save his people. And it ends, or at least we usually think it ends, with the story of Samson, which that's a whole question in of itself. What do you do with Samson? But it is interesting to note the story of Samson ends in chapter 16. We still have 5 more chapters in the book. And Tim, just like I think most people assume the plagues are the entire book of Exodus, and then you read it and you're like, oh gosh, I'm still in like the first third of the book and we're out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the rest of this book about? I think most, unless we've sat down and read it recently, we assume the book of Judges ends with Samson, but it keeps going on. And chapters 19 through 21 take up a very difficult passage of a Levite. So already we're dealing with like the priests. He takes a prostitute. He goes to a town of the tribe of Benjamin. And I mean, I don't know if we need a trigger warning for it, but let's just say some really horrible and messed up things happen to that prostitute. And she is killed. He chops up her body, sends it throughout the land. Civil war takes place. The tribe of Benjamin is almost destroyed until they kidnap wives. And that's where the book ends. And it's a really, like, I don't know, every time you read through it, you kind of get whiplash. You're like, why is this even here? What is this doing? So I want to walk in a little bit on some of the things that we're supposed to pick up. So after the story of Samson, we pick up the 2 stories. So the story of the Benjamite is only one of the last 2 stories in the book of Judges. The other one is a difficulty between the tribes of Micah and Dan. And this sets the scene. These last chapters of the book of Judges are trying to show that even if we get rid of all external enemies, internally, this is not a united nation. These are tribes that are acting independently and sometimes against one another, even though they are to be a kingdom of priests, a royal nation, right? A holy nation. They are supposed to be serving after God. That is not taking place. The key phrase of the book, which continues to appear through the cycles of the Judges and here, is that in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that phrase actually appears at both the beginning and end of Judges 19 through 21, because that's the point. We are still in a lawless, I use the term Wild West, Tim, a little more unsavory, but yes, we are in a lawless time of Israelite history. And that's the point, because where are we leading up to? Well, the beginning of the monarchy here pretty soon. Now, these chapters are pointing out something very important, that the sin of the Israelites is not just that they walk away from God. It's trying to be a bit more explicit. They have become like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if you read through chapter 19 especially, you will see very quickly, even not knowing Hebrew, just read the story, you'll go like, oh, this sounds like what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah when some strangers came and visited a city and the inhabitants of that city gathered around the house and, right, they wanted to violate those visitors. The same thing takes place. And guess what? That's not just a surface similarity. The exact same phrasing, the exact same wording. I won't go into all the details here. I put them in the notes, Tim, but to keep it more high level, the same phrases, the same words are being used. You and I, as readers of the Old Testament to this point, are supposed to hit this and go, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
The tribe of Benjamin is committing the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's how bad things now are in the holy people, right? In the nation of Israel. They have sunk down to the lowest of the low of the book of Genesis.
Mhm.
That phrase, there is no king, everyone did was right in their own eyes, is trying to push us to go, this is not tenable. We
Mhm.
cannot just continue to have the judges because we are not making forward progress. We are still destitute in our sin. Coming out of this killing of the prostitute, among other things, civil war breaks out, and Israel has to rise up against the tribe of Benjamin. They attempt to fight against Benjamin several times, are defeated. Something interesting in chapter 20 is that the tribe of Judah is the first tribe to fight them. After several battles, the tribe of Benjamin's only almost wiped out. All of Israel says, we're not going to give them wives. We're going to just let them die out. But the tribe of Benjamin is smart, and they go and they kidnap women worshiping God at Shiloh.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well done, guys. You preserve your bloodline, but right, even that is somewhat horrible. And then the book ends with that line. There was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Now, Tim, I'm going to have a little bit of a speculative point, but I do think it's setting these things up. I think the clear message is, look, Israel has sunk down to the lowest of the low. We need a change. I also think this is setting up in the back of your readers' minds. If you see someone come from Benjamin, you should probably have second thoughts about them. Because we're about to enter the monarchy. But King David is not the first king, is he? The first king is King Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. I think there is a right. I don't think Judges is written during the time. I think it's written retrospectively as a historian. And so I think there is a shading here that you're supposed to distrust Benjamin, or the tribe rather, when it comes onto the national scene. Much like the next book, Ruth, is going to make you go, no, look, a Davidic king, a Judah king, right? Judah is the first one that fights the tribe Benjamin. A king from Judah is probably from much better stock than the tribe of Benjamin. So I don't know if you want to use the term propaganda or whatnot, but I do think this is an intentional kind of foreshadowing of, yes, we need a king. That's going to help. But if a king comes from Benjamin, that's probably also not going to be what we want. So I think the clear point is Israel sunk low. I think a secondary point is that this is a warning against the Benjamite king, King Saul. But that is a little bit speculative. Tim, what do you do with these last couple chapters? Does anything else I haven't mentioned jump out to you?
Yeah, just kind of rising to a 30,000-foot level for a second. Um, Even as there are gruesome things that are described here, there's a comfort to me in reading this, and it's not the comfort of the events that happened, but it's the comfort knowing that those events that happened were recorded and preserved. And the reason for that is, as we think about the Bible, we go back to that principle, and we've talked about this before, Brian, that not everything that's described in the Bible is prescribed, or not everything that is written down approvingly, but rather
Right.
it's as though God is looking at the sin that's committed. And he wants us so badly to remember it, to know what we're capable of when we try to live life apart from him, or really, to put a finer point on it, when we try to sort of add him as a part of our lives, right? The whole Micah and Dan episode, when we try to kind of put him on the side, but don't really want to follow him as our king. He preserves this for us so that we can see it as a warning, and that it will ultimately move us to worship him, to follow him, and to revere him as God. And so, to me, Brian, as I read stories like this, the comfort is that the Bible does not seek to put a fake mask on humanity. Uh, God sees all of the worst things that happen in this world. And for us as humans, a lot of times what we choose to do is just ignore it. You know, hey, this terrible, tragic thing happens. Well, that thing happens all the time. It's a broken world. We've got all of these ways to kind of downplay it or ignore it. Whereas God is looking at it saying, I cannot ignore this. That literally, God can't help but see it. But also, God is in one sense forcing us to see what he sees, at which point that helps us then to be able to respond as he responds, or to have our hearts shaped as his heart is. That God was absolutely devastated in one sense, that God did not want his people to live in this darkness, and therefore he continued his plan to bring the light. And so even as we read texts like these that are disturbing, they point us back to God. And in that sense, they are blessings because they're a mirror, right? This is who we can be whenever we do not follow God as our King.
Yeah, that's an important point, that this story is not put down to be like, go therefore and do likewise.
Right.
I too, like you, take some comfort in the fact that this is an event like sexual violence. That's an unfortunate part of this world, but God says, I'm not going to let it slip by in this case, unnoticed, unmarked, right?
Yeah.
It is something that requires attention, requires an answer, even a very bloody and violent answer, as the Benjamites are punished. So,
Absolutely.
difficult passage. I think it does serve a function in the story, though, and helps us drive to many of these good theological conclusions. So thank you for jumping in and adding that there, Tim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian, and listeners. I know for Brian and I, we so enjoy the question and answer. This is in one sense what we love to do every day, to read the Bible. Brian, I loved how you said it, to come to the Bible and not necessarily to have every question answered perfectly, but as an invitation to learn and to grow and ultimately to trust. And so we hope it's been beneficial to you, and we want to invite you to share our content, like it, let people know about it. We'd love for this community to grow, and our heartbeat is for people, again, to come to know and love the Lord through his word and through the Bible, through the Old Testament in particular. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Brian, thank you for joining me today. And friends, until next time, stay cool and stay old.